In 27 BC, the Roman state passed through a major transformation that ended the centuries-old republican system and inaugurated a new political era, the Principate. The turning point emerged from the conclusion of a decade-long civil war following the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC. Octavian, the adopted heir of Caesar, emerged as the sole dominant political and military figure in Rome after defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Antony's defeat eliminated the final serious rival for control of the Roman state, while the deaths of Cleopatra and Antony removed the possibility of an Eastern dynasty influencing Roman politics. By 30 BC, Octavian had consolidated authority over the provinces, ensuring the loyalty of the military and the allegiance of Rome's political elite. However, before 30 BC, in 27 BC, to be precise, the Senate formally conferred upon Octavian the honorific title Augustus, marking the transition from the Roman Republic to the imperial system, though the outward appearance of republican institutions was preserved. Augustus's ascension represented a reconfiguration of political power rather than its outright abolition. The Senate retained formal legislative authority, magistracies continued to exist, and consular elections occurred, but the real power resided with the emperor, who controlled the military, the treasury, and the key mechanisms of administration. This careful balance allowed Augustus to exercise unparalleled authority without provoking resistance from traditional republican factions, thereby stabilizing Rome after decades of internal conflict. Central to Augustus' consolidation of power was the establishment of a professional standing army. Whereas the late Republic relied heavily on citizen legions raised seasonally and tied to individual commanders, Augustus institutionalized military service through fixed-term enlistments and standardized pay, creating a loyal, professional cadre. Soldiers were granted pensions upon discharge, often in the form of land in frontier regions, which both rewarded service and facilitated the Romanization of provincial territories. The army, now firmly under imperial command, became a crucial instrument of both internal stability and external defense, capable of deterring insurrection and repelling foreign incursions. The provincial structure of the empire was reorganized to strengthen control and efficiency. Provinces were classified as imperial or senatorial, depending on their strategic importance. Imperial provinces, often located on the empire's borders, contained significant military forces and were governed by legates appointed by Augustus. These provinces were directly under the emperor's authority to prevent military rebellion and ensure secure frontiers. Senatorial provinces, largely peaceful and inland, remained under the administration of proconsuls chosen by the Senate. This division allowed for efficient governance, reduced the likelihood of provincial uprisings, and maintained the Senate's ceremonial role, thereby giving the appearance of shared power while retaining centralized control. Fiscal policy was another area in which Augustus established durable reforms. The collection of taxes was standardized, and provincial revenues were carefully monitored to support both the administration and the army. Augustus reorganized the tributum, a direct tax on citizens and provincial subjects, and the vectigalia, indirect taxes on trade, customs, and property, ensuring that Rome's income could sustain long-term military campaigns, public works, and civil administration. The new system also reduced corruption by imposing accountability mechanisms for provincial governors and financial officers, thereby increasing the efficiency and predictability of state revenue. Augustus also undertook significant reforms within Rome itself, balancing the traditional republican institutions with his overarching authority. The Senate was maintained as a cooperative body whose membership he controlled through appointments, ensuring loyalty and political compliance. Magistracies, including the consulship and praetorship, continued to function, but their holders were constrained by the emperor's overarching authority and the presence of imperial legions in the field. This approach stabilized Rome's political structures, maintained continuity with republican traditions, and avoided provoking immediate resistance among elites who valued historical precedent. A critical aspect of Augustus' consolidation was his careful management of public perception. He emphasized Pax Romana, the restoration of order after decades of civil war, and framed his rule as the revival of republican ideals under a single, capable leader. Monumental architecture, public works, and urban development reinforced the legitimacy of his regime. Augustus' programs included the rebuilding of temples, the construction of roads, aqueducts, and public buildings, and the provision of games and entertainment to maintain civic cohesion. These actions not only demonstrated imperial benevolence, but also strengthened Rome's infrastructure and public morale, establishing a model for subsequent emperors. Militarily, Augustus focused on securing Rome's extensive borders. The empire encompassed territories from Hispania in the west to the eastern provinces formerly under Antony's control, including Asia Minor and Egypt. Augustus stabilized regions along the Danube and Rhine by establishing fortified boundaries and securing alliances with local tribal leaders. His legions were strategically deployed to defend key frontier zones, suppress revolts, and serve as a deterrent against external aggression. The emphasis on defensive organization allowed Rome to maintain territorial integrity and project power without overextending resources. Augustus' policies also promoted administrative professionalism within the empire. Governors and provincial administrators were selected for competence and loyalty, rather than purely for social standing. Augustus created an organized civil service to oversee taxation, legal adjudication, and record-keeping. This institutionalization of governance enhanced the ability of the Western Roman Empire to function efficiently across vast distances, maintain law and order, and implement imperial directives uniformly. The social and cultural impact of Augustus' reforms was equally significant. By consolidating power and stabilizing the state, he allowed Roman society to recover from the disruptions of prolonged civil conflict. Urban elites retained influence within the Senate and municipal councils, while provincials experienced increased security and economic integration. The legal system was standardized, with the emperor's authority serving as the ultimate arbiter, ensuring consistency across the empire. Civic infrastructure, trade networks, and communication routes flourished under imperial oversight, reinforcing cohesion and facilitating the spread of Roman culture throughout the provinces. The Julio-Claudian dynasty extends from the accession of Augustus in 27 BC to the death of Nero in 68 AD, encompassing 5 emperors: Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. This period consolidates imperial authority, expands territorial control, and develops administrative and military structures that defined the early Western Roman Empire. Augustus, as the first emperor, maintained power until he died in 14 AD. During his reign, Augustus secured Rome's borders, restructured the administration, and established mechanisms for succession. Military organization was formalized. Legions were stationed along the Rhine, Danube, and in the provinces of Gaul, Hispania, and the Eastern Territories. Auxiliary troops supplemented the legions, providing flexibility for frontier defense and internal security. Provinces were divided into imperial and senatorial categories, with imperial provinces under the direct command of the emperor's legates, often assigned to regions with significant military presence. Senatorial provinces, generally stable and economically productive, were overseen by proconsuls appointed by the Senate. This division allowed Augustus to maintain personal control over strategic regions while preserving the Senate's ceremonial authority. The fiscal system supported both civil administration and the military. Regularized taxation included direct tributes and indirect duties, monitored through appointed procurators to ensure the reliability of revenue and reduce corruption. Augustus' legal reforms codified procedures for provincial governance, taxation, and judicial oversight, creating a uniform framework for administration. Upon Augustus' death, Tiberius, his stepson and designated heir, assumed power. His reign, from 14 AD to 37 AD, continued the consolidation of imperial authority. Tiberius retained the standing army and provincial organization established by Augustus. Significant attention was given to frontier defense along the Rhine and Danube, where military campaigns were conducted to maintain territorial integrity. Provincial governance continued under the imperial and senatorial division, with an emphasis on administrative continuity. Legal structures for taxation, judicial oversight, and urban administration remained intact. Tiberius relied on experienced administrators and generals to enforce imperial policy, preserving stability across the empire despite political tension within Rome. The accession of Caligula in 37 AD introduced a period of instability lasting until 41 AD. Contemporary records document abrupt changes in administration, arbitrary appointments, and the rapid reassignment of provincial commands. The military maintained its formal structure, though legions were frequently repositioned to address perceived threats or to reinforce loyalty to the emperor. Caligula's policies included administrative reforms, construction projects, and the management of imperial estates, but his reign is marked by erratic decision-making and disruptions to the continuity of governance. Provincial taxation. Claudius completed the annexation of Britannia following military campaigns initiated by Aulus Plautius in 43 AD. The province was divided into administrative districts governed by procurators and legates to ensure efficient taxation and control. Road construction and urban development facilitated troop movements, trade, and communication. Claudius' administration maintained the imperial senatorial division of provinces, supervised financial accountability, and codified procedures for judicial review and taxation. Infrastructure improvements included aqueducts, bridges, and public buildings in Rome and provincial capitals, reinforcing the integration of the provinces into the imperial system. Military recruitment and training followed established protocols, with legions stationed strategically in newly annexed territories and existing provinces to ensure security and rapid response to revolts or incursions. During Claudius' reign, revolts occurred in several regions, including Judea and Britannia, reflecting localized resistance to imperial authority. These uprisings were met with coordinated military campaigns, led by appointed governors and legates, demonstrating the functioning of imperial administrative and military structures. Taxation and legal mechanisms were employed to integrate conquered populations and maintain control over newly incorporated territories. Claudius' legal and administrative reforms, recorded in inscriptions and surviving decrees, reinforced the centralization of authority while maintaining continuity with republican institutions. Following Claudius' death in 54 AD, Nero ascended to the imperial throne, reigning until 68 AD. Nero continued public works, military administration, and provincial governance according to established precedents. His reign witnessed uprisings, including the revolt led by Boudica in Britannia, 60 to 61 AD, which was suppressed by coordinated action of the Roman military under the command of provincial governors and legates. Roman forces maintained frontier security along the Rhine, Danube, and in Britannia, employing both legionary and auxiliary units. Taxation systems and provincial administration continued under central oversight, ensuring revenue collection and the enforcement of law. Nero's reign also included urban development, including road construction, aqueducts, and the rebuilding of sections of Rome after fires, as documented in contemporary records. Public administration in the provinces relied on legates, procurators, and local municipal councils, maintaining the structures established by previous emperors. Legal proceedings, taxation, and the enforcement of Roman law operated consistently across the empire, reflecting the continuation of institutional frameworks. Nero's death in 68 AD ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty, precipitating a period of civil conflict known as the Year of the Four Emperors, yet the administrative, military, and fiscal systems established during this dynasty remained in place and continued to underpin imperial authority. Across the Julio-Claudian period, Rome maintained a structured military presence throughout the empire. Legions were stationed in strategic provinces, with rotations and postings designed to maximize defensive capacity and maintain loyalty to the emperor. Auxiliary forces supplemented legionary deployments, providing specialized capabilities in cavalry, archery, and regional knowledge. Military discipline, training, and logistical support were formalized, with standardized equipment, pay, and pension systems ensuring a professional and reliable force. Command structures were clearly defined, with legates reporting to the emperor and provincial governors overseeing recruitment, supplies, and fortifications. The army functioned as both a defensive mechanism and an instrument of internal stability. Provincial governance during this period was characterized by systematic oversight. Imperial legates administered frontier provinces with both civil and military authority. Senatorial provinces retained nominal senatorial control, but operated under imperial supervision. Taxation, judicial authority, and local governance were standardized. Provinces were integrated into the empire's economic network, with roads, ports, and communication systems facilitating trade, military movement, and administrative coordination. Legal and fiscal structures provided a framework for consistent enforcement of law and collection of revenue, reducing corruption and maintaining stability across diverse regions. The Julio-Claudian dynasty also solidified mechanisms of succession. Augustus established the principle of designated heirs, often selected from within the imperial family or through adoption, to ensure continuity of rule. Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero each ascended according to these principles, though occasional deviations and political interference occurred. Succession practices emphasize the transfer of military command, fiscal authority, and administrative control to maintain stability and prevent fragmentation of power. The death of Emperor Nero in 68 AD marked the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and initiated a period of political instability in the Western Roman Empire. Nero's suicide left the imperial throne vacant, as no formally designated heir existed, triggering a rapid succession of claimants and a civil conflict that historians term the Year of the Four Emperors, 69 AD. The four emperors, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian, assumed control sequentially within the span of 12 months, reflecting the crucial role of the military and provincial legions in determining imperial authority. Following Nero's death, Servius Sulpicius Galba, governor of Hispania Tarraconensis, was declared emperor by his legions. The Senate ratified this declaration, and Galba assumed formal control over Rome and the imperial provinces. His authority depended on the loyalty of the legions and the compliance of the Senate. During his brief reign, Galba attempted to maintain administrative continuity and uphold the provincial and fiscal systems established by previous emperors. However, his inability to secure the support of the Praetorian Guard and key provincial commanders led to instability. Within a few months, Marcus Salvius Otho, previously aligned with Galba, orchestrated a coup with the support of the Praetorian Guard and key elements of the Roman political apparatus. Galba was assassinated in January 69 AD, and Otho was recognized as emperor. Otho's reign lasted only a few months. His control was contested by Aulus Vitellius, commander of the legions stationed in Germania Inferior and Germania Superior. Vitellius' troops declared him emperor, initiating military confrontation. Otho engaged Vitellius' forces in northern Italy at the Battle of Bedriacum in April 69 AD, where he was defeated and subsequently committed suicide. This defeat enabled Vitellius to enter Rome and assume imperial authority. Vitellius' rule was similarly brief. While he consolidated control in the capital, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, governor of Syria and commander of the Eastern legions, had been declared emperor by his forces. Vespasian maintained the loyalty of legions stationed in Judea and Egypt, regions critical to the empire's grain supply. His forces, led by generals including Mucianus and Agrippa the Younger, advanced against Vitellius' troops. In December 69 AD, the Second Battle of Bedriacum resulted in Vitellius' defeat and death, permitting Vespasian to assume uncontested control of the Western Roman Empire. The rapid succession of four emperors within a single year illustrates the decisive role of military loyalty and provincial command in imperial legitimacy. Vespasian, founder of the Flavian dynasty, reigned from 69 AD to 79 AD. His accession restored stability to the Western Roman Empire after the civil wars of 68 to 69 AD. Vespasian's policies focused on administrative reform, fiscal stabilization, and the strengthening of military structures. Provinces were reorganized, and governors were appointed based on experience and loyalty to the emperor. The imperial army was maintained in strategic provinces along the Rhine, Danube, and eastern borders, while legions stationed in Egypt and Judea ensured control over critical grain supplies. Vespasian continued the fiscal policies of previous emperors, enforcing regular taxation, auditing provincial revenues, and maintaining centralized oversight to support both military expenditures and civil administration. Vespasian also initiated extensive public works and urban development in Rome and provincial centers. The construction of the Flavian amphitheater, known as the Colosseum, began during his reign and was designed to provide a venue for public entertainment and to reinforce imperial authority through civic infrastructure. Roads, aqueducts, and bridges were repaired or constructed, facilitating military movement, trade, and communication. These projects also ensured the integration of provincial populations into the imperial system by enhancing economic and logistical connectivity. Legal and administrative structures were reinforced. Provincial courts operated under imperial oversight. Local taxation and judicial systems were standardized, and governors were accountable for both civil and military administration. The military reforms under Vespasian emphasized discipline, loyalty, and regional stability. Legions were stationed in frontier provinces with well-defined responsibilities for defense and rapid response to rebellion or invasion. Auxiliary forces continued to supplement the legions, providing specialized cavalry, archery, and regional expertise. Command structures were codified, with legates reporting to the emperor and provincial governors coordinating recruitment, supply, and fortification maintenance. The standardization of pay, equipment, and service terms reinforced professionalism and loyalty. Vespasian's reign also addressed the remnants of civil unrest from 69 AD, ensuring that provincial legion Titus' brother Domitian succeeded him in 81 AD and reigned until 96 AD. Domitian focused on frontier defense, particularly along the Danube and Rhine, fortifying positions and reorganizing legions to address potential incursions by Germanic tribes. Administrative oversight was strengthened, with governors monitored for adherence to fiscal and legal responsibilities. Domitian implemented building programs, repaired infrastructure, and maintained urban centers, ensuring communication and logistical efficiency across the Western Roman Empire. The imperial treasury was stabilized through continued taxation, mining operations, and management of state assets, supporting both civilian administration and military expenditures. Domitian's policies reinforced the centralization of imperial authority. Senators continued to hold offices, but their influence was limited by the emperor's control of appointments, military command, and provincial oversight. Legal systems were codified and enforced consistently, ensuring uniform administration of justice. Provincial integration was maintained through a combination of infrastructure, taxation, and military presence. Public works and civic amenities reinforced Roman identity and facilitated economic activity throughout the provinces. Military discipline and frontier security were emphasized, preventing large-scale revolts and sustaining stability for the duration of the Flavian dynasty. The Flavian dynasty established precedents for governance, military organization, and provincial administration that persisted beyond Domitian's death. Key features included professional legions loyal to the emperor, clearly defined provincial governance structures, standardized taxation, and oversight of public works and infrastructure. Succession practices remained focused on direct familial transfer, supplemented by the appointment of capable administrators and generals to ensure continuity of authority. The period from 96 AD to 180 AD in the Western Roman Empire is defined by the reigns of Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, collectively termed the Five Good Emperors. This sequence of rulers maintained administrative stability, territorial integrity, and effective military control while reinforcing imperial institutions. The framework established during the Julio-Claudian and Flavian dynasties was consolidated, with clear provincial governance, structured military deployment, and systematic fiscal and legal administration. Nerva, 96 to 98 AD, ascended following the assassination of Domitian. His brief rule focused on restoring administrative balance and consolidating imperial authority without initiating major territorial or military campaigns. Nerva reaffirmed existing provincial structures, overseeing the appointment of governors and provincial administrators to ensure continued compliance with imperial regulations. Military policy emphasized maintaining loyalty among the legions stationed along the Rhine and Danube frontiers, with stipends and veteran settlements administered according to established procedures. Nerva also implemented financial measures to stabilize the treasury and oversee equitable taxation, continuing the fiscal frameworks of his predecessors. To ensure continuity of succession, Nerva formally adopted Trajan, governor of Germania Superior, as his heir, establishing the principle of adoption-based imperial succession that characterized the five good emperors. Trajan, 98 to 117 AD, succeeded Nerva and extended both territorial control and administrative oversight. Trajan's reign represents the maximum territorial extent of the Western Roman Empire. Military campaigns were conducted in Dacia, modern Romania, between 101 and 106 AD, resulting in its annexation and the establishment of organized provincial administration. The integration of Dacia involved the establishment of legions, fortifications, and infrastructure, including roads and supply depots to facilitate control and economic exploitation. Taxation was formalized to include direct tributes from urban and rural populations, while mining and agricultural production contributed to imperial revenue. Administrative measures ensured that governors and procurators maintained accountability, with records of revenue and legal decisions preserved centrally. Trajan also undertook campaigns in the east, including limited operations in Parthian territories, aiming to secure Roman influence and buffer zones along the eastern frontiers. Provinces in the east retained the imperial senatorial distinction, with legions stationed in strategically significant areas under direct imperial command. Infrastructure development, including roads, bridges, and supply lines, supported both military operations and economic integration. Legal oversight extended to provincial courts, ensuring uniform application of Roman law. Trade networks were reinforced, and urban centers across the provinces experienced growth, reflecting the stability and administrative efficiency of Trajan's reign. Upon Trajan's death, Hadrian, 117 to 138 AD, focused on consolidation and defensive organization rather than expansion. Hadrian withdrew from some of Trajan's eastern acquisitions and fortified boundaries across the empire. The construction of Hadrian's Wall in Britannia exemplifies his approach to securing frontier provinces with permanent fortifications, supplemented by garrison legions and auxiliary troops. Similar fortifications were established along the Rhine and Danube to maintain defensive depth. Provincial administration under Hadrian emphasized uniform governance, with clearly defined boundaries, appointed governors, and oversight of taxation, legal proceedings, and public works. Hadrian also reorganized the bureaucracy to increase efficiency and centralize decision-making. Legal codification and judicial reforms ensured consistency across provinces, with appeals to the emperor maintained through a standardized channel. Public works projects, including aqueducts, roads, and urban reconstruction, facilitated military logistics, commerce, and administrative communication. Provincial integration relied on these structures to maintain order, support economic activity, and provide rapid response capabilities for the military. Hadrian's policies established a framework for sustainable governance and reinforced the long-term stability of the Western Roman Empire. Antoninus Pius, 138 to 161 AD, succeeded Hadrian and maintained the administrative, fiscal, and military systems without initiating major campaigns. His reign focused on governance continuity, provincial stability, and the efficient collection of taxes. Legal oversight and judicial administration operated according to established norms, with provincial governors responsible for local administration and military coordination. Infrastructure projects continued, particularly the maintenance of roads, aqueducts, and urban centers, supporting economic stability and communication throughout the provinces. Legionary deployment remained consistent along the Rhine, Danube, and Britannia, ensuring frontier security. Antoninus Pius' administration reinforced the principles of centralized authority, fiscal responsibility, and institutional continuity. Marcus Aurelius, 161 to 180 AD, governed during a period of increased military pressure, primarily along the Danube frontier, where Germanic tribes, including the Marcomanni and Quadi, conducted incursions. Marcus Aurelius conducted coordinated campaigns to repel these invasions, maintaining operational control of the legions and provincial defenses. Legal and administrative oversight continued uninterrupted, with provincial governors executing both civil and military duties under imperial supervision. Taxation and fiscal administration were maintained to fund military campaigns while sustaining urban and provincial infrastructure. Logistics for troop movement, supply depots, and fortifications were organized to ensure operational effectiveness across multiple theaters. During Marcus Aurelius' reign, communication and administrative coordination were reinforced through the use of provincial archives, standardized record-keeping, and delegated authority to trusted officials. Legions operated within clearly defined commands, supported by auxiliary units with specialized capabilities. Recruitment, pay, and veteran settlements were administered according to established protocols, preserving loyalty and readiness. Provincial legal systems continued to operate under imperial supervision, ensuring the uniform application of Roman law and maintenance of public order. The five good emperors established a pattern of adoption-based succession, prioritizing the designation of capable heirs over dynastic inheritance. This mechanism reduced political instability by selecting successors with proven administrative or military experience, while maintaining continuity of governance. The policy also preserved institutional knowledge, as successors were trained in the management of provinces, fiscal systems, and military organization before assuming power. Economically, the five good emperors reinforced Roman fiscal stability through consistent taxation, management of imperial estates, and exploitation of resources in newly annexed provinces such as Dacia. Trade networks across the Mediterranean and Europe were maintained, with roads, ports, and urban markets facilitating the movement of goods, military supplies, and personnel. Administrative oversight ensured that provincial revenues were collected efficiently and transported to the imperial treasury to support both civil administration and military expenditure. The military during this period was professionalized and strategically deployed. Legions were stationed in frontier provinces, with clear chain-of-command structures linking legates, governors, and the emperor. Auxiliary forces supplemented legionary capabilities, providing flexibility in cavalry, archery, and specialized operations. Defensive fortifications, including walls, fortresses, and watchtowers, were constructed or reinforced along borders. Logistics systems supported the rapid deployment of troops, a consistent supply of provisions, and communication across provinces. Provincial administration was defined by the imperial senatorial division, clear legal jurisdiction, fiscal accountability, and infrastructure maintenance. Governors were responsible for implementing imperial directives, overseeing taxation, administering justice. Septimius Severus rose to power as governor of Pannonia Superior following the assassination of Pertinax and the brief rule of Didius Julianus. The legions in the provinces recognized Severus as emperor in 193 AD, demonstrating the decisive influence of the military in imperial succession. Upon securing Rome, Severus consolidated authority over both the western and eastern provinces, ensuring loyalty of the legions by increasing soldiers' pay, instituting longer service terms, and granting veterans land upon discharge. The emperor stationed legions strategically along the Rhine, Danube, and in key provinces such as Britannia and Hispania, maintaining frontier defense and internal order. Provincial governors, generally selected from experienced military commanders, combined civil and military authority to enforce imperial directives efficiently. Severus implemented administrative and fiscal reforms to strengthen central control. Taxation systems were standardized across provinces, with oversight provided by procurators and imperial agents. Revenue collection included both direct tributes from urban and rural populations and indirect taxes on trade, mining, and property. Fiscal reforms also included auditing procedures to prevent corruption and ensure consistent revenue flow. These measures allowed the empire to finance military expansions, infrastructure projects, and administrative operations across vast territories. Legal codification under Severus emphasized imperial prerogatives, standardizing legal procedures in provincial courts while preserving the formal authority of local magistrates and councils. Military campaigns under Severus aimed at both consolidating authority and securing borders. In the east, Severus conducted operations against Parthian forces, ultimately capturing key cities in Mesopotamia and reinforcing Rome's influence in the region. These campaigns were supported by logistical coordination, including supply lines, roads, and fortifications. In Africa and Europe, legions were deployed to secure provinces and suppress revolts or unrest. The military reforms reinforced hierarchical command structures, ensuring that legates and provincial governors reported directly to the emperor and adhered to defined operational protocols. Pay increases, pensions, and land grants ensured the loyalty of the troops and stability in frontier provinces. Following Severus' death in 211 AD, his sons Caracalla and Geta became co-emperors. Co-rule lasted briefly. Caracalla assumed sole control following Geta's assassination in the same year. Caracalla maintained the military structures established by his father and further increased soldiers' pay to secure loyalty. In 212 AD, Caracalla issued the Constitutio Antoniniana, granting Roman citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. This legal measure expanded imperial authority, standardized taxation obligations, and integrated provincial populations more fully into the administrative and legal framework of the empire. While it increased revenues, the edict also expanded the fiscal responsibilities of the central treasury, requiring careful management of provincial contributions. Caracalla's reign involved frontier campaigns in Germania and along the eastern borders, maintaining the deployment of legions in strategically critical areas. Provinces continued to operate under the imperial senatorial distinction, with governors executing civil and military duties. Infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and forts, was maintained to ensure troop mobility, trade, and administrative oversight. Taxation and fiscal management remained standardized, with imperial procurators overseeing revenue collection and auditing provincial accounts. Provincial legal systems operated under central supervision, applying Roman law uniformly across territories. After Caracalla, Macrinus, 217 to 218 AD, formerly Praetorian prefect, assumed the throne. His rule emphasized fiscal prudence and stabilization of military expenditures. Macrinus reduced soldiers' bonuses compared to Caracalla, seeking to balance the treasury, but faced opposition from the military, which ultimately led to his overthrow. Administrative and legal structures remained largely intact, with provincial governance continuing under imperial oversight and military deployments maintained along frontier regions. Elagabalus, 218 to 222 AD, succeeded Macrinus, with authority confirmed by the support of the Eastern legions. Elagabalus' reign retained the administrative, fiscal, and military frameworks established by Severus and Caracalla. Imperial governance continued to rely on provincial governors for tax collection, law enforcement, and military oversight. Infrastructure projects, urban administration, and logistical support for the legions were preserved. Elagabalus' deposition in 222 AD allowed Severus Alexander to assume power, emphasizing continuity and preservation of institutional structures. Severus Alexander, 222 to 235 AD, maintained administrative stability and reinforced military organization. The legions along the Rhine, Danube, and eastern provinces continued under direct imperial command, with auxiliary units providing specialized capabilities. Fiscal systems were standardized and monitored through provincial procurators. Legal and judicial administration operated uniformly across the empire, ensuring consistent enforcement of laws. Infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and urban centers, facilitated military mobility, trade, and administrative coordination. During Alexander's reign, external threats, particularly from Germanic tribes and the Sassanid Persians, were addressed through coordinated campaigns and fortification improvements. The Severan dynasty demonstrates a clear shift in imperial governance toward military centralization. Loyalty of the army became the primary determinant of imperial authority, while the senatorial class assumed a subordinate, advisory, or ceremonial role. Provinces were managed through appointed governors and legates with both civil and military authority, ensuring integration of fiscal, legal, and defensive responsibilities. Infrastructure and logistical systems were maintained to support rapid troop deployment, trade, and administrative oversight. Taxation and revenue collection were systematized, with centralized auditing mechanisms to ensure the stability of the treasury despite increased military expenditures. Economically, the Severan emperors relied on fiscal efficiency and resource management to sustain administrative and military functions. Taxation, both direct and indirect, was administered through provincial procurators and documented through imperial archives. Revenue supported military salaries, fortifications, and public works, including roads, bridges, and aqueducts. Urban centers served as hubs for commerce, law, and administration, while rural territories contributed agricultural produce and raw materials for provincial and imperial needs. The Constitutio Antoniniana extended legal and fiscal obligations to free provincial populations, integrating them more fully into imperial administration and increasing the empire's revenue base. The Severan dynasty represents a transition from senatorial influence to military-centric imperial governance, emphasizing centralized authority, professionalized legions, and direct oversight of provinces. Legal codification, administrative efficiency, and fiscal standardization underpinned the durability of imperial structures, even as political instability increased toward the end of the dynasty. The assassination of Severus Alexander in 235 AD marked the conclusion of the Severan line, ushering in the crisis of the 3rd century, characterized by a rapid succession of emperors, external invasions, and economic disruption. The period from 235 AD to 284 AD in the Western Roman Empire is defined by profound political instability, economic disruption, and external threats. It begins with the assassination of Severus Alexander in 235 AD and ends with the rise of Diocletian in 284 AD. During these 50 years, the empire experienced a rapid succession of emperors, frequent military usurpations, economic collapse, plagues, and continuous pressure along its frontiers. This era, historically documented, is termed the crisis of the 3rd century, reflecting the systemic challenges that threaten the continuity of Western imperial structures. The assassination of Severus Alexander in 235 AD marked the end of the Severan dynasty. Maximinus Thrax, commander of the Danube legions, assumed power following recognition by the army. His rise emphasizes the increasing dependence of the imperial office on military support rather than senatorial approval. Provincial legates and frontier commanders played a decisive role in succession, appointing or deposing emperors according to the loyalty of their troops. Maximinus' reign involved campaigns along the Danube frontier to suppress incursions by Germanic tribes, reinforcing the military-centric approach to imperial governance established during the Severan dynasty. The central administration, although formally intact, increasingly focused on financing the army, with fiscal policies adapted to sustain troops' salaries, fortifications, and logistical supply lines. Following Maximinus, a rapid succession of emperors assumed power through military acclaim or usurpation. Gordian I and Gordian II were elevated in Africa in 238 AD, but their rule lasted only months before defeat by forces loyal to Maximinus' successors. Subsequently, Pupienus and Balbinus were appointed by the Senate, operating in parallel with the proclaimed Gordian III as co-emperor. These overlapping reigns highlight the fragmented authority of the empire, where legitimacy was derived primarily from the allegiance of provincial legions and the recognition of key urban centers rather than consistent dynastic succession. During this period, the empire faced the Gallic Empire, 260 to 274 AD, emerged during this crisis as a breakaway polity in the western provinces, including Gaul, Britannia, and parts of Hispania. It was established by Postumus, who assumed the title of emperor in response to perceived administrative neglect by the central authority. This secession demonstrates the weakening of central control, though the imperial legal and administrative frameworks were retained within the breakaway regions. Local governors continued tax collection, law enforcement, and military coordination, with armies deployed to protect borders and maintain internal order. The Gallic Empire was reintegrated into the Western Roman Empire by 274 AD under Emperor Aurelian, restoring nominal territorial cohesion. Economic and fiscal structures during the 3rd century were under severe strain. Continuous military campaigns, internal rebellions, and external threats necessitated increased expenditures. Taxation systems were extended, including direct tribute, customs duties, and requisitions, to fund both administrative and military needs. Inflation emerged as coinage was debased to cover the growing fiscal deficit, and plagues reduced the population available for agriculture, urban labor, and military recruitment. Trade networks experienced disruption, with roads, ports, and urban markets affected by warfare and insecurity. Provincial revenues, though monitored by procurators and legates, were insufficient to maintain prior levels of administrative efficiency and infrastructure maintenance, creating localized economic instability. Urban centers remained important hubs of governance, commerce, and law, though their resources were increasingly diverted toward military needs. Cities hosted administrative offices, tax collection centers, and garrisons to coordinate provincial defense. Public works continued where feasible, but large-scale infrastructure projects were reduced due to resource constraints and military priorities. Roads and fortifications were maintained to support troop movements and supply logistics, facilitating rapid response to invasions and internal uprisings. The military continued to be the primary instrument of authority throughout the crisis. Legions were stationed along the Rhine, Danube, and eastern frontiers, supplemented by auxiliary units providing specialized capabilities in cavalry, archery, and regional reconnaissance. Command structures remained formalized, with legates reporting directly to the emperor, but the rapid turnover of rulers introduced inconsistencies in leadership, strategy, and logistics. Military pay, veteran settlements, and pensions were maintained according to established procedures, though fiscal pressures occasionally delayed disbursements. Despite frequent usurpations, legions generally adhered to structured chains of command, ensuring defensive operations and frontier security remained effective. Legal and administrative systems persisted, but were increasingly subordinated to military priorities. Provincial governors continued to oversee taxation, judicial proceedings, and urban administration, yet their authority was contingent on the approval of military commanders and the loyalty of stationed legions. Appeals to the emperor were inconsistently processed due to rapid leadership changes, though central archives preserved records of taxation, property ownership, and legal adjudications. Infrastructure maintenance, including roads, aqueducts, and urban fortifications, was adapted to support military logistics and communication across provinces. Health crises, including recurring plagues, further strained the Western Roman Empire. Population losses reduced agricultural output, diminished labor availability, and increased fiscal pressure on remaining citizens. These demographic pressures necessitated adjustments in taxation, recruitment, and resource allocation. Provincial authorities coordinated relief efforts, ensured continuity of governance, and maintained urban services within the constraints imposed by military emergencies and economic contraction. Despite these systemic challenges, some institutional continuity persisted. The division of provinces into imperial and senatorial jurisdictions continued in principle, though practical authority shifted toward military commanders in provinces of strategic importance. Centralized record-keeping, taxation oversight, and legal codification remained in place, enabling the empire to function even amid repeated leadership changes and territorial fragmentation. Imperial appointments were increasingly based on military experience, emphasizing operational competence over senatorial rank or civic status. The 3rd century also witnessed significant developments in frontier defense. Permanent fortifications, including walls, watchtowers, and fortified camps, were constructed or reinforced along the Rhine, Danube, and eastern boundaries. Garrison legions coordinated patrols, reconnaissance, and rapid response operations, ensuring that incursions could be contained. Logistics included maintenance of roads, bridges, and supply depots, facilitating troop mobility and sustaining defensive campaigns over extended periods. These measures mitigated some effects of political instability, preserving the territorial integrity of the Western Roman Empire despite internal and external pressures. The accession of Diocletian in 284 AD marked a decisive turning point in the governance of the Western Roman Empire, concluding the prolonged period of instability known as the Crisis of the 3rd century. His rise followed the assassination of Carus' sons, Carinus and Nemirian, after campaigns against Sassanid Persia and internal rivalries. Diocletian consolidated authority through the army, securing the loyalty of legions stationed along the Danube and in Illyricum, and swiftly established control over both western and eastern provinces. His reforms addressed structural weaknesses exposed during the previous half-century, particularly military fragmentation, fiscal instability, and administrative inefficiency. Diocletian implemented the Tetrarchy, a system dividing imperial authority among 4 rulers. 2 senior emperors, titled Augusti, governed the east and west, while 2 junior emperors, or Caesars, were appointed to assist and succeed the Augusti. This division ensured continuous leadership, rapid response to frontier threats, and clear lines of succession. Initially, Diocletian assumed the role of Augustus in the east, appointing Maximian as Augustus in the west, with Galerius and Constantius Chlorus serving as Caesars. This administrative structure provided geographic and operational clarity, allowing each ruler to exercise autonomous authority over civil administration, military command, and fiscal management within their respective regions while maintaining formal unity under the Tetrarchic framework. Provincial administration was reorganized under Diocletian to enhance efficiency and central oversight. The empire was subdivided into smaller units, called dioceses, each supervised by vicarii who reported directly to the Augusti. Provinces were further divided into municipalities with standardized local governance. Governors exercised civil authority over taxation, law enforcement, and public works, while maintaining coordination with stationed military commanders. This dual chain of command ensured that civil administration continued uninterrupted even during military crises, mitigating the fragmentation that characterized the 3rd century. Military reform under Diocletian emphasized frontier defense and operational readiness. The army was reorganized into comitatenses, mobile field units, and limitanei, garrison troops stationed along borders. Limitanii defended river frontiers, fortifications, and urban centers, while comitatenses could be deployed across regions in response to invasions or rebellions. Supply lines, roads, and logistical depots were reinforced to sustain both defensive and offensive operations. Legions and auxiliary units were structured under a hierarchical command, with strategic coordination among Augusti, Caesars, and provincial commanders. Pay, provisioning, and veteran settlement programs were standardized, ensuring loyalty and operational continuity. Economic and fiscal reforms addressed the instability caused by currency devaluation and inconsistent taxation during the 3rd century. Diocletian implemented taxation standardization, creating fixed tax rates based on land, population, and production. Provinces submitted detailed censuses of households, land, and livestock to calculate contributions. The imperial treasury regulated coinage and introduced measures to stabilize currency, attempting to control rampant inflation. Revenue supported both civil administration and military expenditures, including fortification maintenance, legionary salaries, and logistical operations. Provincial fiscal oversight was reinforced through appointed procurators and vicarii, ensuring accountability and minimizing diversion of resources. Legal and administrative codification was enhanced under Diocletian. Provincial governors and vicarii operated within clearly defined legal frameworks, applying uniform procedures across civil, criminal, and fiscal matters. Appeals and correspondence between provincial and imperial authorities were systematized, ensuring records of taxation, property ownership, and legal adjudications were maintained in central archives. Urban centers functioned as administrative and judicial hubs, facilitating communication between provincial authorities and the tetrarchic hierarchy. Public works, including roads, aqueducts, and defensive fortifications, were systematically maintained to support governance, commerce, and military operations. Diocletian fortified key frontiers to contain external threats. Along the Rhine and Danube rivers, permanent fortifications, watchtowers, and fortified camps were constructed or reinforced. Eastern provinces faced Sassanid incursions, prompting the construction of garrisons and logistical support networks. Coastal defenses were strengthened to deter seaborne raids, particularly in Italy and North Africa. Coordination between garrison troops and mobile field units allowed rapid response to incursions, while infrastructure facilitated the transport of supplies and personnel. Military engineering projects under Diocletian emphasized sustainability and strategic coverage across the empire. Administrative centralization under each ruler exercised autonomous operational control within their sphere, but imperial edicts and strategic objectives were coordinated to preserve unity. This approach mitigated previous conflicts between military factions, senatorial influence, and provincial governors, providing the Western Roman Empire with a structured mechanism for continuity and crisis management. Infrastructure projects under Diocletian were extensive. Roads connecting military bases, provincial capitals, and trade centers were repaired and standardized, facilitating the movement of legions and administrative personnel. Fortresses along borders were reinforced with walls, towers, and barracks, enabling sustained defensive operations. Aqueducts, bridges, and urban public works ensured continuity of urban life and provincial administration, supporting both population needs and logistical efficiency. These projects were systematically documented and monitored, with provincial governors reporting progress to the tetrarchic administration. Economic policy included the regulation of trade, markets, and production. Diocletian attempted to stabilize prices through edicts on maximum prices for goods and services, addressing inflationary pressures. Fiscal contributions from agricultural and urban production were standardized, with provincial audits ensuring adherence to imperial directives. Resource allocation prioritized military readiness, infrastructure maintenance, and administrative continuity. The treasury managed coinage, provincial contributions, and expenditures systematically, providing a sustainable framework for fiscal stability. Diocletian's retirement in 305 AD, alongside Maximian, initiated a planned transfer of power to their respective Caesars, demonstrating the operational effectiveness of the Tetrarchy. The structured succession and division of authority preserved administrative continuity and military preparedness, setting a precedent for East-West coordination in subsequent decades. Following his abdication, the Western Roman Empire retained operational integrity, with the Tetrarchic system continuing under successors, though eventual pressures in the 4th century would necessitate further reforms. The period from 306 AD to 337 AD is defined by the reign of Constantine the Great, whose consolidation of the Western Roman Empire marked both political stabilization and institutional transformation. Constantine rose to power following the death of his father, Constantius Chlorus, in 306 AD at Eboracum, modern York. Upon his father's death, the legions stationed in Britannia proclaimed Constantine as emperor, establishing immediate military authority. This succession was recognized by some segments of the empire, while others remained loyal to the existing tetrarchic structure, initiating a period of civil conflict across western and eastern provinces. Constantine engaged in a series of campaigns to secure recognition of his authority. Initially, he faced rival claimants, including Maxentius in Italy and Licinius in the Balkans and eastern provinces. Military operations involved precise coordination of legions, siegecraft, and logistical planning. Key battles included the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, where Constantine's forces defeated Maxentius, resulting in the latter's death and consolidation of imperial authority in the western provinces. The military campaign exemplified the continued centrality of army loyalty, frontier deployment, and strategic fortifications in securing imperial succession and governance. Following victory over Maxentius, Constantine implemented administrative and fiscal reforms to integrate the western provinces fully under his authority. Provincial governors were reaffirmed in their civil and military responsibilities, reporting directly to the emperor. Taxation systems were standardized, with revenues allocated to support military operations, urban administration, infrastructure maintenance, and central treasury requirements. Infrastructure projects, including roads, bridges, aqueducts, and fortifications, were systematically maintained to ensure communication, troop mobility, and logistical efficiency across the empire. In 313 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, formally legalizing Christianity and guaranteeing religious tolerance throughout the empire. This edict recognized the legal standing of Christian communities, permitting property ownership, assembly, and the maintenance of ecclesiastical structures. Provincial administration adapted to this change by including Christian leaders in civic correspondence, ensuring that religious institutions complied with fiscal obligations and local governance regulations. Church property was cataloged and integrated into provincial registries for legal and taxation purposes. The edict did not impose Christianity on the population, but removed previous legal prohibitions, aligning with the broader framework of imperial law and governance. Constantine actively organized and regulated the Christian Church to function within the imperial administrative system. He convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, establishing standardized procedures for doctrinal disputes, ecclesiastical hierarchy, and canonical law. Provincial bishops were recognized as official authorities, coordinating with imperial representatives on matters of legal compliance, property management, and local governance. Ecclesiastical councils documented decisions, maintaining continuity and providing reference for legal adjudication and administration across provinces. These measures integrated Christian institutions into the broader administrative structure without relying on myth, legend, or theological interpretation. The foundation of Constantinople in 330 AD marked a significant administrative and strategic reorientation. Located on the eastern edge of Europe at the site of Byzantium, the new capital served as both an imperial residence and a centralized hub for administration, military oversight, and commerce. Construction included city walls, aqueducts, roads, and administrative buildings, reflecting standardized Roman urban planning. Military garrisons were stationed to secure the city and surrounding regions, ensuring logistical support for both eastern and western provinces. Constantinople functioned as an operational center for imperial administration, legal documentation, and fiscal oversight, complementing traditional Western administrative centers such as Rome and Milan. Constantine maintained ongoing military vigilance on Western frontiers, particularly along the Rhine, Danube, and Italian territories. Legions were deployed strategically to deter incursions by Germanic tribes, including Franks, Alemanni, and Goths. Fortifications were reinforced along river borders, and temporary field camps were established to monitor movements and coordinate rapid response operations. Supply networks were maintained through provincial infrastructure, ensuring the movement of troops, materials, and communication across western and northern provinces. Military command structures integrated both regional and central oversight, ensuring consistent implementation of defensive strategies. Fiscal and economic policies under Constantine emphasized stability and uniformity. Provincial tax collection followed standardized procedures, with detailed censuses of land, population, and production informing contributions to the central treasury. Currency reform included the introduction of the solidus, a stable gold coin designed to facilitate trade and reduce inflationary pressures. Provincial oversight ensured compliance with taxation and accounting regulations. Urban centers served as hubs for commerce, legal administration, and public works, with revenues supporting both civic and military operations. Legal codification continued under Constantine, integrating both civil and ecclesiastical matters within the framework of Roman law. Provincial governors and urban magistrates applied uniform procedures in judicial cases, including property disputes, contractual obligations, and criminal adjudication. Appeals to the emperor were formally documented and reviewed by imperial officials. Church administration operated in parallel, with bishops accountable for canonical law and local governance, while coordinating with civil authorities on fiscal and legal matters. These procedures ensured continuity of legal processes across Western provinces despite regional variation and previous instability. The administrative integration of Christian institutions involved formal recognition of bishops, councils, and ecclesiastical courts. Church property, personnel, and financial records were systematically recorded and monitored. Christian communities were permitted to operate schools, charitable institutions, and welfare programs, supporting provincial governance in urban and rural areas. These operations were conducted in accordance with imperial legal and fiscal requirements, ensuring uniformity and accountability. Constantine's reign also involved oversight of the eastern provinces, including campaigns against the Sassanid Persians and stabilization of the Balkan territories. Coordination between eastern and western operations was facilitated by the tetrarchic precedent, with Caesars and governors executing orders under direct imperial supervision. Supply chains, fortifications, and urban administration were maintained to support simultaneous operations across geographically separated regions. Military logistics, taxation, and civil administration functioned under a standardized framework, ensuring operational coherence throughout the empire. Infrastructure investments under Constantine supported both military and civil objectives. Roads connecting provincial capitals, forts, and urban centers were repaired and expanded to enable troop movement, trade, and administrative efficiency. Aqueducts, bridges, and fortifications were constructed or maintained in key urban centers, supporting population needs, commerce, and strategic defense. Urban planning followed standardized Roman models, integrating military, administrative, and civic functions. Constantinople, Rome, Milan, Trier, and Nicomedia exemplify centers designed for multifunctional governance, military coordination, and fiscal management. The period from 337 AD to 395 AD encompasses the reigns of emperors following the death of Constantine the Great, marked by the formal and permanent division of the Roman Empire into Eastern and Western administrations. Constantine died in 337 AD, leaving the empire to his three sons. Cities such as Rome, Milan, Trier, and Carthage continued to function as provincial hubs for governance, taxation, legal adjudication, and military coordination. Roads, aqueducts, and fortifications remained operational to ensure the movement of officials, troops, and resources. The western provinces faced increasing pressure from migrating and invading Germanic tribes, including the Franks, Alemanni, Burgundians, and Visigoths. Military deployment relied on limitanei stationed along river borders, such as the Rhine and Danube, and mobile comitatenses for rapid intervention. Key fortifications, including river fortresses, border watchtowers, and urban defensive walls, were reinforced. Troop garrisons coordinated closely with provincial governors, ensuring both frontier security and supply chain integrity. Campaigns were documented through military correspondence and dispatches to the emperor, providing operational oversight without reliance on interpretation of motivation or rumor. Political administration in the West was constrained by both dynastic division and geographic distance from the imperial center in Constantinople. Succession disputes among Constantine's sons resulted in military interventions, with Constantine II's death in 340 AD allowing Constans to consolidate control over the western provinces. The Western administration emphasized centralized fiscal management, legal adjudication, and military coordination while maintaining communication with Eastern counterparts. Provincial governors were responsible for ensuring compliance with imperial edicts, accurate tax collection, and maintenance of urban infrastructure and fortifications. Economically, the Western Empire remained reliant on agricultural production, trade, and taxation. Estates and rural communities provided grain, olive oil, and other staples, while cities served as commercial hubs facilitating long-distance trade across the Mediterranean and Atlantic seaboard. Taxation was regulated according to standardized imperial directives, with censuses documenting land ownership, population, and livestock. Coinage was minted according to imperial specifications, providing a stable medium of exchange. Provincial officials recorded revenues, military expenditures, and civil spending in registers archived at central administrative centers. Legal frameworks continued to operate under Roman codices, applied uniformly by governors and magistrates across the western provinces. Appeals and correspondence were documented to preserve continuity of adjudication. Administrative functions included oversight of property disputes, contractual enforcement, and criminal prosecutions. Provincial and municipal courts operated under the direct supervision of prefects and vicarii, ensuring consistent application of law. Christian ecclesiastical authorities, recognized under Constantine, were integrated into the legal framework for property and fiscal matters, maintaining operational clarity while upholding imperial jurisdiction. Urban centers remained critical to Western governance, serving as administrative, military, and commercial nodes. Rome retained symbolic and administrative significance, while Milan became the principal imperial residence and operational headquarters for the Western Emperor. Trier functioned as a strategic northern hub for coordination with Rhine frontier garrisons. Carthage managed affairs in Africa, providing tax revenues and logistical support. Infrastructure projects, including road maintenance, aqueducts, bridges, and defensive walls, facilitated communication, troop movement, and economic activity. Military operations in the West focused on deterring and responding to tribal incursions along the Rhine, Danube, and northern Italian frontiers. Legions stationed at critical points monitored crossings and coordinated with mobile units. Campaigns documented by provincial commanders included patrol reports, supply requisitions, and tactical summaries. The army remained professionalized, with established pay structures, veteran settlements, and disciplinary frameworks. Military logistics relied on established roads, river transport, and fortified depots to ensure operational sustainability across Western provinces. Internal governance emphasized centralized oversight while recognizing the autonomy of local administrators for routine civil functions. Provincial governors implemented tax collection, public works, and judicial administration, coordinating with military commanders for defense. Documentation of provincial affairs, including census records, fiscal accounts, and legal rulings, provided continuity across multiple reigns. Central directives from the emperor in Milan ensured uniform compliance, while communication with the Eastern Empire enabled coordinated responses to broader threats. The Western provinces also faced ongoing challenges in North Africa and Hispania, where local uprisings and tribal incursions required rapid military intervention. Fortifications at Carthage, Hispania Tarraconensis, and along riverfront settlements were maintained to sustain control. Armies deployed for defensive campaigns adhered to standardized logistical procedures, maintaining supply lines and lines of communication with provincial authorities and the imperial court. Christian communities were permitted to manage charitable, educational, and welfare programs, while coordinating with civil authorities on taxation and legal compliance. These arrangements provided continuity of operations within both urban and rural settings without reliance on myth or legend. Economic continuity in the West depended on the integration of agricultural, trade, and urban production systems. Grain shipments from North Africa supplied Rome and other urban centers, while inland trade facilitated the distribution of goods across Gaul, Hispania, and Italy. By 395 AD, following the death of Theodosius I, the empire was formally divided into eastern and western entities, with Honorius governing the west and Arcadius the east. This division was codified through imperial law and military administration. Western emperors retained authority over civil governance, taxation, and military command, while recognizing the structural and operational independence of eastern provinces under Constantinople. Urban centers continued to serve as administrative and logistical hubs, supporting both local governance and strategic military operations along the frontiers. The period from 395 AD to 410 AD represents a decisive phase in the decline of the Western Roman Empire, characterized by administrative fragmentation, military challenges, and repeated internal power struggles. The death of Theodosius I in 395 AD formalized the permanent division of the Roman Empire into eastern and western entities. Honorius, his younger son, assumed the western imperial office, while Arcadius ruled in the east. Administrative and military authority in the western provinces faced structural limitations due to geographic distance, fragmented command, and the increasing reliance on subordinate generals to enforce imperial policy. The Western Roman administration in this period depended heavily on praetorian prefects, urban magistrates, vicarii, and provincial governors. These officials managed taxation, urban infrastructure, legal adjudication, and local garrisons. Documentation from this period confirms that fiscal pressures were acute. Agricultural production, particularly in Italy, Gaul, and North Africa, continued to provide the bulk of imperial revenues. Urban centers, including Rome, Milan, Ravenna, and Trier, served as hubs for administration and military coordination. Tax collection was increasingly inconsistent due to pressure from external threats and regional disruptions, placing additional strain on the treasury. The Western Roman army faced persistent pressure along the northern and eastern frontiers. Germanic tribes, including the Visigoths, Franks, Vandals, and Alans, exploited gaps in frontier defense. Roman military command was divided between field armies and border garrisons. Comitatenses remained mobile units capable of strategic redeployment, while limitanii were responsible for guarding fixed fortifications along rivers such as the Rhine and the Danube. Coordination between these forces required standardized dispatches, garrison reports, and supply documentation. Despite these measures, frontier defense increasingly relied on federated agreements with barbarian groups, documented in treaties and military records, rather than solely on Roman legions. Internal instability was compounded by frequent usurpations and power struggles. Generals, often commanding mobile field units, exerted substantial influence over imperial succession. Honorius' court, centered in Ravenna, relied on military strongmen such as Stilicho, who exercised de facto control over Western operations. Records indicate that Stilicho coordinated military campaigns, frontier defense, and political appointments, maintaining administrative cohesion in the absence of consistent imperial initiative. These arrangements were formalized through documented military correspondence, decrees, and fiscal allocations. During this period, the Visigoths, under the leadership of Alaric, initiated sustained incursions into the Balkans and Italy. Alaric's movements were documented through military dispatches and imperial correspondence, reflecting both the strategic threat and the Western Empire's limited capacity to respond effectively. Repeated negotiations with Alaric's forces involved formalized treaties and recorded payments, including subsidies and allocations of grain. These agreements aimed to integrate or neutralize the Visigoths while attempting to maintain Western territorial integrity. Despite these measures, repeated incursions exposed weaknesses in frontier enforcement, troop coordination, and fiscal capacity. Urban administration in the western provinces was increasingly strained. Cities faced declining tax revenue due to agricultural disruption, population displacement, and frontier insecurity. Public works, including aqueducts, bridges, and defensive walls, suffered from the sack of Rome in 410 AD by the Visigoths represents a critical marker of Western Roman decline. Military records confirm that imperial garrisons were insufficient to repel the assault. Alaric's forces conducted a controlled occupation, systematically extracting supplies, valuables, and hostages. Civic administration during this period involved coordination between the imperial court, urban magistrates, and local leaders to maintain essential functions. The sack, while catastrophic in political and symbolic terms, did not immediately dismantle administrative structures in surrounding provinces, which continued to operate under Honorius' authority and the oversight of generals like Stilicho. Fiscal instability during this period reflected cumulative pressures from military campaigns, barbarian incursions, and internal governance challenges. Taxation procedures were documented in provincial registers, but enforcement was increasingly uneven. The Western Empire relied on a combination of grain requisitions, monetary levies, and negotiated contributions from federated barbarian groups. Treasury records indicate that military expenditures, particularly payments for mercenary and federate forces, consumed a disproportionate share of available revenue, limiting funds for infrastructure and civil administration. Currency circulation faced disruption due to inflationary pressures and local debasement, documented through contemporary coinage studies and fiscal edicts. Legal administration continued to function under Roman codices, including imperial rescripts and provincial statutes. Governors, vicarii, and urban magistrates maintained courts, recorded adjudications, and processed appeals to the emperor or the praetorian prefect. Christian ecclesiastical authorities, integrated under Constantine, maintained property, legal, and fiscal responsibilities in urban centers. Bishops participated in civic administration by adjudicating matters concerning church property, charitable programs, and local disputes. Documentation of these activities reflects both continuity of civil order and the integration of ecclesiastical governance into imperial administration. Military correspondence and records from this period highlight the strategic allocation of forces in response to repeated threats. Rhine and Danube garrisons reported troop strength, fortification status, and enemy movements. Mobile field armies were dispatched to respond to incursions, accompanied by logistical documentation detailing supplies, pay, and transportation. Coordination between Western generals, urban administrators, and provincial governors relied on a formalized chain of command, ensuring operational clarity despite geographic and political fragmentation. Documentation confirms that these systems remained functional even as frontier security deteriorated. In addition to external pressures, internal challenges included administrative succession disputes, the rise of powerful generals as de facto rulers, and coordination difficulties with Eastern counterparts. The Western Emperor, operating primarily from Ravenna, required communication with Eastern authorities in Constantinople regarding military support, fiscal transfers, and frontier policy. These communications were preserved in written correspondence, dispatches, and imperial decrees, ensuring operational continuity despite strained relations and occasional disagreements on resource allocation. Infrastructure and urban provisioning remained critical to sustaining population and administrative functions. Roads, bridges, and aqueducts were maintained to facilitate troop movements, trade, and communication. Urban granaries documented grain distribution to prevent famine, while urban militias were coordinated for local defense. Defensive walls, particularly in Rome and northern Italian cities, were reinforced according to documented engineering specifications. Fortifications along rivers and mountain passes were inspected and reported in military records, ensuring documented oversight of frontier defense systems. By 410 AD, the Western Roman Empire faced a convergence of structural weaknesses. Administrative coordination remained operational, but military capacity, fiscal stability, and frontier security were increasingly compromised. Documentation from provincial governors, military dispatches, and imperial correspondence confirms that governance persisted, yet the Western Empire lacked the capacity to enforce authority uniformly across all provinces. The sack of Rome symbolized the empire's vulnerability and the limits of administrative and military control, highlighting systemic deficiencies that would accelerate decline in subsequent decades. The period from 410 AD to 455 AD marks the final decades of operational authority for the Western Roman Empire, characterized by repeated barbarian incursions, political instability, and the erosion of imperial control over key territories. Following the sack of Rome by the Visigoths under Alaric in 410 AD, administrative, military, and fiscal systems faced heightened pressure. Imperial authority remained formally intact under Emperor Honorius until 423 AD, followed by a succession of Western rulers whose reigns were brief and heavily influenced by military leaders and regional powers. The structural weaknesses identified before 410 AD persisted, amplified by diminished revenue, reliance on federate forces, and the fragmentation of provincial governance. Rome's sack by Alaric, documented in contemporary sources such as Zosimus and Olympiodorus, demonstrated the limitations of Western imperial military coordination. Imperial garrisons were insufficient to prevent the occupation and looting of the city, which resulted in the extraction of valuables, hostages, and supplies according to recorded procedures. Despite the symbolic significance, surrounding provinces maintained administrative continuity, with prefects, vicarii, and provincial governors continuing to enforce taxation, adjudicate legal cases, and manage local garrisons. Urban populations were provisioned through documented grain allocations and maintenance of remaining civic infrastructure, highlighting the persistence of civil operations amid crisis. Following Honorius' death, the Western imperial succession involved a series of short-reigned emperors, including Valentinian III, for 125 to 455 AD, whose authority was heavily dependent on military generals and court officials. Key military figures, notably Aetius, exercised de facto control over frontier defense, troop deployments, and interactions with federate groups. Administrative correspondence and imperial edicts formalized these arrangements, documenting the delegation of authority, logistical directives, and military strategy. The office of the emperor functioned as a legal and ceremonial authority, while operational power resided with military leadership, documented in dispatches, treaties, and fiscal allocations. Military pressures during this period were concentrated along the western frontiers, particularly in Gaul, Hispania, and Italy. Vandal incursions from North Africa, under the leadership of Genseric, became increasingly organized, resulting in raids and territorial control along the coasts. Simultaneously, Burgundians, Franks, and Visigoths conducted campaigns across Gaul, exploiting weaknesses in frontier garrisons. Roman defense relied on both legions stationed along borders and mobile field armies, with command coordinated through formalized channels. Documentation includes troop musters, supply requisitions, and records of military expenditures, demonstrating structured operational procedures despite ongoing threats. The Vandal sack of Rome in 455 AD, under Genseric, followed prolonged military campaigns across the western Mediterranean. Contemporary sources document systematic extraction of wealth, hostages, and provisions. Imperial records indicate that Valentinian III's authority could not marshal sufficient forces to resist these operations. The administrative response relied on regional governors and urban magistrates to manage post-sack recovery, provisioning of civilian populations, and preservation of essential civic functions. Military dispatches confirm coordination attempts with remaining garrisons, although the capacity to enforce control beyond fortified centers was limited. Economic conditions deteriorated as repeated invasions disrupted trade, agricultural production, and taxation. Provincial registers document reduced grain shipments from North Africa, Hispania, and Gaul, impacting urban provisioning. Coinage circulation declined, and regional officials maintained inventories of remaining resources to allocate provisions to troops and populations. Fiscal allocations increasingly prioritized military payments for federate allies and mercenary contingents, documented through treasury records and official correspondence. The imbalance between military expenditure and civilian needs further strained administrative capacity. Urban centers, including Rome, Ravenna, Milan, and Carthage, continued to serve as administrative and logistical hubs. Documentation confirms maintenance of urban infrastructure, grain distribution, water supply, and law enforcement under local magistrates. Fortifications were reinforced according to recorded engineering and military specifications. Despite repeated attacks, provincial administration preserved continuity of civil governance, including tax collection, legal adjudication, and urban provisioning, reflecting a structured but increasingly constrained system of authority. Military reliance on federate groups, federati, increased significantly. Germanic tribes, including Visigoths and Burgundians, were enlisted as allies, tasked with frontier defense and local garrisoning. Formal treaties and contracts documented their service obligations, territorial concessions, and payment schedules. These arrangements provided short-term operational capacity, but further eroded direct imperial authority, transferring de facto control of regions to federate leadership while maintaining formal imperial oversight through recorded agreements. Internal political instability was exacerbated by factional struggles at court and rivalry among generals. Emperors were often appointed or deposed by military leaders, with documentation including imperial edicts, correspondence, and legal codices confirming procedural legitimacy. Decisions regarding succession, territorial administration, and military deployments were mediated by generals such as Aetius, demonstrating the centrality of military authority in operational governance. Despite these constraints, imperial bureaucracy continued to maintain registers, provincial correspondence, and legal oversight, preserving administrative continuity where possible. The western provinces suffered a gradual loss of territorial control. Provinces in Hispania, legal administration persisted, with provincial governors, vicarii, and urban magistrates overseeing civil disputes, property management, and criminal adjudication. Ecclesiastical authorities operated in parallel, with documented responsibilities for church property, charitable institutions, and dispute resolution. Codified procedures ensured continuity of governance despite the reduction in territorial control. Appeals to the emperor or regional generals were recorded, maintaining a formalized legal framework amid crisis conditions. Communication and logistics remained crucial to operational cohesion. Roads, bridges, and fortifications were maintained for troop movement, dispatch of correspondence, and transport of supplies. Military records and provincial correspondence document coordination between the central administration in Ravenna and provincial authorities. Grain and material resources were allocated through established inventories, ensuring that remaining urban populations and garrisons received provisions according to recorded procedures. By 455 AD, the Western Roman Empire had lost effective control over multiple Western provinces. Rome itself had been sacked twice within 5 decades, yet administration, legal systems, and urban management continued under imperial authority. Reliance on federate troops, delegation of power to military generals, and loss of territorial integrity reflected the systemic weaknesses that would culminate in the ultimate collapse of the Western imperial apparatus. Documentation confirms that formal governance structures persisted but were increasingly ceremonial, with operational authority transferred to military intermediaries and barbarian federates. The period from 455 AD to 476 AD represents the terminal phase of the Western Roman Empire, characterized by the complete erosion of imperial authority, repeated barbarian incursions, and the formal transfer of power to non-Roman rulers. Following the Vandal sack of Rome in 455 AD under Genseric, the Western Emperor Petronius Maximus assumed power through documented succession procedures. But his reign lasted only 73 days before he was killed during the Vandal entry into Rome. These events, recorded in contemporary sources such as Prosper of Aquitaine, Hydatius, and Marcellinus Comes, highlight the rapid turnover of imperial office holders and the diminishing operational capacity of the Western administration. The death of Petronius Maximus created a power vacuum in which military leaders and barbarian federates increasingly dictated the appointment and deposition of emperors. Imperial authority became heavily dependent on the support of generals such as Ricimer, a powerful magister militum of Suevic descent who exercised de facto control over Western affairs. Documentation confirms that Ricimer orchestrated multiple imperial appointments, including Avitus for 155 to 456 AD, Majorian for 157 to 461 AD, and Libius Severus for 161 to 465 AD, acting as the operational authority while emperors remained largely ceremonial figures. Territorial control of the western provinces declined progressively during this period. Gaul, Hispania, and parts of North Africa were increasingly administered by federate kings or military commanders, with Roman governors retaining limited administrative functions in urban centers. Documents, including imperial edicts, military dispatches, and fiscal records, indicate that the Western emperor's authority was nominal in regions under barbarian occupation or settlement. Taxation and provisioning continued in the remaining Roman-controlled areas, though revenue collection was irregular and heavily dependent on military oversight. The reliance on federate troops, foederati, intensified. Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Burgundians, and Vandals were contracted to defend remaining Western territories, enforce imperial decrees, and maintain internal security. Contracts were formalized and documented, specifying payment schedules, territorial responsibilities, and obligations to support Roman garrisons. These arrangements provided temporary operational capacity, but transferred effective military control from Roman legions to federate leadership. This shift is reflected in correspondence between the emperor, generals, and provincial authorities, which records coordination of military movements, supplies, and frontier defense. Rome itself, while no longer a center of consistent imperial authority, continued to function administratively under the oversight of generals and urban magistrates. Following repeated sackings, the city relied on formalized grain distributions, maintenance of remaining infrastructure, and coordination with federate forces to maintain minimal civic operations. Contemporary records indicate that urban provisioning, law enforcement, and public works were sustained according to documented procedures, despite the absence of a resident, effective emperor. Emperors during this period faced significant external threats. Vandals, under Genseric, established control over Carthage and maritime provinces, systematically raiding coastal territories in Italy and North Africa. Visigoths and Ostrogoths asserted control over Gaul and Hispania, often negotiating formal treaties with the Western Emperor for recognition and tribute. Documentation of these treaties, including terms of military service and land allocation, reflects the Western administration's constrained ability to enforce authority directly over these regions. Internal administrative operations were increasingly centered in Ravenna, which became the functional capital of the Western Empire. Urban officials, including praetorian prefects, vicarii, and magistrates, managed fiscal collection, legal adjudication, and logistical support for military operations. Treasury records and correspondence confirm allocation of resources for frontier defense, provisioning of troops, and maintenance of urban centers. These documented procedures maintain nominal governance, while operational authority rested with generals and federate leaders. Legal administration persisted under imperial codification. Provincial courts and urban magistracies continued to adjudicate civil and criminal cases according to Roman law, referencing imperial edicts and codices, including the Codex Theodosianus. Ecclesiastical authorities participated in property management and charitable distribution, maintaining detailed records of church holdings and activities. Appeals to the emperor or military authority were documented, preserving continuity of governance despite reduced territorial control. Military command during this period was characterized by delegation to generals, coordination with federate troops, and maintenance of frontier fortifications. Rhine, Danube, and Italian garrisons were reinforced according to recorded engineering and logistical directives, though operational capacity was limited by insufficient manpower, fiscal constraints, and loss of peripheral provinces. Strategic planning relied on documented troop movements, supply requisitions, and operational correspondence between generals and provincial commanders. The reign of Majorian, 457 to 461 AD, represents a documented attempt to restore Western authority through military campaigns, administrative reforms, and fiscal consolidation. Majorian conducted campaigns in Gaul and Hispania, coordinating troop movements, supply chains, and regional administration. Documentation from contemporary chroniclers indicates that Majorian reasserted nominal control over federate leaders, restored fiscal oversight in key provinces, and attempted infrastructure repairs. Despite these measures, his authority was curtailed by the influence of Ricimer and the persistent fragmentation of Western territory. Subsequent emperors, including Libius Severus and Anthemius, 467 to 472 AD, operated under similar constraints. Military authority continued to dominate imperial operations, while emperors were limited to formal recognition of federate arrangements, fiscal allocations, and coordination of urban provisioning. Administrative continuity persisted in cities and provincial centers through documented procedures, but the territorial reach of Western imperial authority continued to contract. By the deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD by Odoacer, the remaining Western imperial apparatus formally ceased operations. Odoacer, a Germanic military leader and former federate commander, assumed authority over Italy, distributing revenues, administering law, and maintaining military order according to Roman precedents documented in prior administrative practice. Imperial offices, including prefects, vicarii, and urban magistrates, were subsumed under Odoacer's authority, formalized in correspondence and administrative records. Rome and other Western urban centers retained symbolic significance, but functional governance, military control, and fiscal administration transitioned to non-Roman leadership. Economic structures persisted in localized form under barbarian rule, with land tax, trade regulation, and urban provisioning maintained according to Roman administrative precedent. Military garrisons and federate contingents were deployed to enforce security, administer territory, and maintain supply networks. Legal adjudication continued under codified Roman law, while ecclesiastical authorities managed church property, charitable institutions, and local dispute resolution. These procedures were documented, ensuring continuity of operational governance even as formal Western imperial structures collapsed. Infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and fortifications, continued to function to support administration and military operations. Records confirm maintenance and inspection of key structures, coordination of grain shipments, and allocation of urban and rural resources. Frontier fortifications along the Rhine and Danube, although formally under nominal Western imperial authority, increasingly fell under federate control or were abandoned in response to pressure from migrating tribes and regional power shifts. By 476, the social hierarchy during the early Principate under Augustus is established in legal texts, census records, and inscriptions that differentiate citizens into senators, equestrians, municipal elites, freedmen, and slaves. Senators held the highest legal status and were subject to property requirements recorded in the Lex Julia and later in the Lex Papia Poppaea. Equestrians maintained significant administrative and financial roles, documented through prefectures, procuratorships, and provincial assignments. Municipal elites, including decurions, governed local cities, presiding over taxation, public works, and judicial matters. These roles are confirmed through inscriptions and municipal charters such as the Lex Ernitana. Freedmen operated within legal limits defined by manumission laws and were commonly employed in commerce, administration, and imperial service, with documentation confirming their roles as imperial secretaries, accountants, and estate managers. Slavery functioned within a legal framework detailed in the Digesta and Institutes, emphasizing ownership rights, manumission procedures, and obligations. Social status and mobility were strictly defined in law and visible in census returns and property declarations. Urban society centered on cities such as Rome, Carthage, Milan, Trier, and Ravenna, supported by documented provisioning systems including the Annona, state-operated grain distribution. Records of grain shipments from Egypt, Africa Proconsularis, and Sicily confirm standardized logistical routes, storage operations, and ration allocations. Aqueduct maintenance, road repairs, and building projects are documented in inscriptions, municipal decrees, and imperial edicts, demonstrating ongoing urban administration across the empire. The economy operated through agricultural production, trade networks, taxation, and state procurement. Agricultural estates, latifundia, are documented through land registers, estate accounts, and correspondence. Italy and provincial territories such as Gaul, Hispania, and North Africa supplied grain, oils, wine, and livestock to urban centers. Taxation records show assessments based on land, property, and trade, with municipal elites responsible for tax collection and transmission to provincial treasuries. The system is documented in the Edict of Prices of Diocletian, the Codex Theodosianus, and provincial audits. Roman currency standards are preserved in mint records and hoard evidence. The denarius system of the early Principate gradually shifted through debasements recorded in metallurgical analyses, imperial mint instructions, and economic edicts. Fiscal reforms under Diocletian and Constantine, documented in legal codes, introduced the solidus, which maintained stability through the later centuries of the empire. Taxation in kind expanded to support military provisioning, recorded in requisition orders and supply rosters. Trade operates along documented commercial routes across the Mediterranean, Rhine, Danube, and North African coasts. Bills of lading, shipwreck cargo inventories, and customs records confirm the exchange of grain, ceramics, textiles, metals, and manufactured goods. Ports such as Ostia, Carthage, Massilia, and Alexandria served as logistical hubs. State monitoring of prices, weights, and measures is documented through municipal regulations and imperial oversight. The military structure of the Western Roman Empire from 27 BC to 476 AD underwent formal reorganizations documented in military diplomas, pay rosters, imperial edicts, and frontier installation records. Under Augustus, legions were stationed in permanent bases along the Rhine, Danube, and in frontier provinces such as Syria and Egypt. Their organization, legionaries, auxiliaries, and cavalry, is preserved through inscriptions, muster lists, and equipment inventories. Legions maintained standardized structures of cohorts, centuries, and command hierarchies. The early empire relied on professional standing forces and auxiliary cohorts recruited from non-citizen populations, with citizenship granted after service. These rules are preserved in military diplomas and legal texts. Frontier defenses included forts, watchtowers, and roads documented through archaeological surveys and construction records. The Flavian and Antonine periods sustained expansion and stabilization campaigns, recorded in dispatches, frontier surveys, and inscriptions commemorating military victories. The 3rd century introduced documented logistical and structural strain, reflected in reduced recruitment, increased reliance on provincial levies, and heightened military expenditures noted in treasury audits and imperial correspondence. The crisis of the 3rd century produced reforms under Gallienus, who excluded senators from military commands, as documented in imperial rescripts. Diocletian and Constantine restructured the military into comitatenses, mobile field armies, and limitanii, frontier troops. A division recorded in the Notitia Dignitatum, which lists units, command structures, regional deployments, and administrative offices. Supply arrangements for the army relied on requisitions documented in provincial orders and fiscal accounts. Grain, equipment, horses, and uniforms were procured through state-controlled workshops, fabrici, established by Diocletian and Constantine and recorded in administrative texts. Military pay schedules and donatives are preserved in papyri and legal codes. Recruitment increasingly used federate troops, formalized through treaties, foedera, specifying obligations, pay, and settlement rights. These agreements with Goths, Burgundians, Franks, Alans, and Vandals are documented in diplomatic correspondence and imperial directives. The 4th and 5th centuries show increased integration of federate groups into Roman military operations. Their settlement within imperial borders, documented through land allocation orders, shifted the military from a predominantly Roman force to a composite of Roman and barbarian contingents. Generals such as Stilicho, Ricimer, and Aetius held dominance as magistri militum, with authority recorded in imperial decrees, military orders, and legal grants. Their control over troop deployments, taxation for military spending, and negotiations with federate leaders is supported by contemporary chroniclers, including Olympiodorus, Zosimus, and Hydatius. Urban society in the 4th and 5th centuries sustained civic institutions such as councils, magistrates, and guilds, guided by legal codes and municipal records. Cities maintained public order, market regulation, infrastructure, and judicial operations. Ecclesiastical institutions assumed increasing administrative responsibilities, documented in church records, councils, and imperial legislation, recognizing bishops' authority over charitable distributions and property management. Economic contraction in the 5th century is documented through reduced coinage circulation, declining trade volume in Mediterranean cargo records, and decreased taxation yields in treasury documents. North Africa's loss to the Vandals in 439 AD removed a major grain and tax source for Italy, as recorded in Roman diplomatic correspondence and fiscal audits. Western administrative centers compensated through taxation in kind, requisitioning, and local provisioning, documented in provincial orders. The military system of the late Western Empire relied heavily on federate armies, confirmed in treaties describing troop quotas, leadership roles, and settlement boundaries. Ongoing campaigns in Gaul, Hispania, and Italy required coordination between Roman generals and Federate commanders. Administrative records document troop distributions, logistical planning, and emergency fortification repairs performed during conflicts with Visigoths, Vandals, Huns, and internal rebellions. The final decades of the Western Empire preserved legal, administrative, and economic structures despite territorial losses. Urban finance, property registration, and judicial operations continued according to codified Roman law, preserved in the Codex Theodosianus and later the Codex Justinianus. Cities maintained defense, tax collection, and provisioning under increasing influence from military commanders. Correspondence from this period reflects continued implementation of Roman law and administration under increasingly limited authority. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD marked the administrative endpoint of Western imperial authority. The social, economic, and military structures described in documented evidence continued to function under Odoacer, who retained Roman law, taxation procedures, and administrative offices, confirmed in correspondence with the Eastern Roman Emperor and in local legal records. Roman institutions persisted as frameworks for successor kingdoms in Italy, Gaul, and Hispania. The legacy of the Western Roman Empire after 476 AD is identified through documented transmissions of law, administration, language, and institutional frameworks preserved in written codes, papyri, legal commentaries, charters, correspondence, church records, and government documents from the late 5th to early medieval periods. The evidence demonstrates how Roman structures continued under post-imperial rule in Italy and Western Europe, how administrative forms were adapted by successor states, and how Roman law and urban culture remained active components of governance. The legacy is examined chronologically from the late 5th century through the 7th century, with additional reference to long-term documented continuities. After the deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 AD, the administrative structure of Italy did not collapse. The change of rule placed Odoacer as Rex Italiae, but he retained the Roman Senate, the prefecture, and provincial offices. This is confirmed in correspondence recorded by Cassiodorus, the Varii, and documents sent by Odoacer to the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno acknowledging nominal subordination. Taxation, civic administration, and judicial structures continued under Roman law, as seen in land registries, senatorial decrees, and legal proceedings preserved in surviving records. Odoacer's administration maintained the Praetorian prefecture in Italy and implemented fiscal responsibilities using Roman procedures. The persistence of Roman law is documented in the continued application of the Codex Theodosianus and earlier juristic works. Judicial rulings in Italy during Odoacer's governance reference Roman legal principles and procedures, demonstrating continuity rather than the establishment of the Ostrogothic kingdom under Theodoric the Great, 493 to 526 AD, retained Roman administration more explicitly. Cassiodorus Varii, the Edictum Theodorici, and legal documents from the period confirm the preservation of Roman civil law for the Roman population and administrative offices staffed by Roman elites. Theodoric's government maintained the Senate, the Praefectus Urbi, and the Praetorian prefecture, using Roman-trained officials. The Edictum Theodorici applied standardized legal rules across Goths and Romans based on Roman law, without innovation unrelated to legal precedent. Land surveys, taxation, military provisioning, and municipal duties continued according to previously established Roman practices. Roman urban culture, including the maintenance of aqueducts, baths, and public buildings, is evidenced through archaeological maintenance records and administrative correspondence. Public works continued in Rome, Ravenna, Verona, and other cities under the Ostrogoths, reflecting the endurance of Roman engineering and urban administration. Records confirm repairs to the Annio Novis aqueduct and maintenance of road networks, demonstrating institutional continuity. The Catholic Church became a major transmitter of Roman administrative culture. Church councils, episcopal correspondence, and papal records preserved administrative clarity modeled on imperial structures. Popes maintained legal archives, chancery procedures, and diplomatic correspondence with Constantinople and Western rulers. The papal chancery adopted Roman administrative terminology and procedures. Documentary evidence from the Liber Pontificalis shows standardized record-keeping, property management, and legal adjudication consistent with late Roman practice. Roman law continued to shape secular governance across Western territories through written codes issued by successor kingdoms. The Lex Romana Visigothorum, Breviary of Alaric, 506 AD, compiled Roman laws and juristic writings for use among Roman subjects under Visigothic rule. It includes excerpts from the Codex Theodosianus, the Sententiae of Paulus, the Institutes of Gaius, and imperial constitutions. Its widespread copying and survival indicate its active legal authority. In the Burgundian Kingdom, the Lex Romana Burgundianum, early 6th century, codified Roman civil law for the Roman population, demonstrating the continued application of Roman jurisprudence. These laws regulated property, inheritance, contracts, and procedural matters according to Roman legal tradition documented directly from late imperial codes. The Frankish kingdom also preserved aspects of Roman administration. Gregory of Tours, Merovingian charters, and the Formulae Marculfi document the use of Roman titles, taxation practices, land grants, and written contracts influenced by Roman precedent. While Frankish law codes such as the Lex Salica governed the Franks, Roman law continued for Gallo-Roman populations in cities such as Tours, Lyons, and Arles. Municipal institutions survived in modified forms, and bishops often assumed roles previously held by Roman civic officials. Latin remained the administrative and legal language across these territories. Surviving charters, legal formulas, ecclesiastical letters, and papal documents confirm consistent use of late Latin for governance. The evolution of Latin into regional Romance dialects is documented through inscriptions, administrative texts, and ecclesiastical records from the 6th to 8th centuries, showing linguistic continuity rooted in Roman linguistic structure. The influence of Roman architecture and engineering persisted through the maintenance of existing structures and imitation in new construction. Records show continued repair of roads, bridges, and aqueducts across Italy, Gaul, and Hispania. Ostrogothic and early Byzantine structures in Italy used Roman building techniques recorded in construction reports and archaeological evidence. Roman urban layouts guided municipal functioning in late antique cities. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, became the primary custodian of Roman law, administration, and military structure, preserving the imperial framework. The Codex Justinianus, Digest, Institutes, and Novelli 528 to 534 AD, compiled Roman law from the classical jurists and imperial constitutions, influencing later European legal systems. These codifications preserved Roman jurisprudence and ensured its transmission well beyond the fall of the Western Empire. The Western territories received copies indirectly through church channels and subsequent Carolingian revival efforts. The cultural legacy of the Western Roman Empire is documented through the survival of Roman literature, philosophy, and education. Manuscript traditions maintained classical works copied by ecclesiastical institutions. Schools in Rome, Milan, Marseille, and other centers continued to teach grammar, rhetoric, and law into the early medieval period, documented in monastic rules, episcopal correspondences, and educational texts. The transmission of classical literature is evidenced in manuscript catalogs from the 6th and 7th centuries. Roman measurement systems, weights, and currency standards influenced successor economies. Documents concerning taxation, land measurement, and property disputes used Roman measurements such as the iugerum and the modius, preserved in legal and administrative texts across Gaul, Italy, and Hispania. Fiscal practices such as land surveys and cadastral assessments followed Roman precedents adapted to local needs. The Western Roman Empire's military legacy persisted indirectly. Successor states used Roman fortifications, weapons manufacturing centers, and strategic road networks. The presence of federate troops within Roman territory before 476 AD, documented in treaties and settlement records, created continuity between Roman military organization and the armies of the successor kingdoms. Several commanders in the 6th and early 7th centuries, particularly under the Ostrogoths and Visigoths, were trained in Roman military practice. The political concept of empire in Western Europe retained Roman foundations. The coronation of Charlemagne in 800 AD as Imperator Romanorum is documented by papal records, imperial correspondence, and the royal Frankish annals. This act explicitly traced authority to the former Western Empire. The Carolingian administration adopted Roman legal forms, written charters, standardized Latin, and imperial symbolism directly modeled on preserved Roman precedents. By the 7th century, the documented influence of Rome is visible in legal codes, administrative structures, ecclesiastical governance, education, literature, urban organization, and cultural practices across Western Europe. Roman institutions endured through direct usage, codification, and adaptation within successor states. The legal continuity found in the Breviary of Alaric, the Lex Romana Burgundianum, and the Justinianic corpus demonstrates ongoing reliance on Roman jurisprudence. Ecclesiastical administration replicated Roman bureaucratic systems, ensuring preservation of documentation and legal clarity. Urban centers continued functioning within Roman municipal frameworks long after the removal of Western imperial authority. The Western Roman Empire's legacy, therefore, is not defined by the administrative termination of 476 AD, but by the documented continuity of its law, administrative systems, language, architecture, education, and governance across the successor kingdoms and into the medieval period.